Good day and welcome to today's webinar about legal requirements for cooperatives and future automated processes. I'm Elma Pinkham and I will be the facilitator for the webinar today. Important changes has been made to the Cooperatives Act of 2008. Thank you, sorry about that. And the webinar aims to highlight some of these changes as well as provide information about planned changes to annual return submissions through automated processes. Please note the recording of this webinar will remain on YouTube and Facebook. If you want to view it again at a later stage, you will be able to do so by using the links that were provided in the invite. During the webinar, you are welcome to post questions under comments. We will take the questions after the presentation. Please keep your questions related to cooperatives, as we will only be taking questions on cooperatives. The program will be start with a short introduction by myself, whereafter Aubrey Murifi, a manager in the cooperatives unit, will continue with the presentation, followed by the question and answer session. As we then move to the first slide, CIPC was brought about by the Companies Act of 2008. In terms of Section 185(1) of the Companies Act, the Commission is established as a juristic person to function as an organ of state within the public administration, but as an institution outside of a public service. Continuing to the next slide, CIPC offerings include two legs, basically. The one side, CIP is about businesses and corporate regulation. On this side, we work with companies, cooperatives, and CC services. And on the other leg, we have got intellectual property, innovation, and creativity. And in those units, they work with patents, designs, trademarks, and copyrights. Moving to our next slide, CIPC objectives include the registration of companies, cooperatives, and intellectual property rights, as well as the maintenance of the information. We do disclosure of the information on its registers. We enforce the relevant legislation. We promote education and awareness of the companies and intellectual property law. Further, there's licensing of business rescue practitioners and monitoring compliance with and contravention of financial reporting standards and making recommendations thereto. And lastly, we report, we research, and we advise the Minister on matters of national policy relating to company and intellectual property law. Then I'm going to hand over, as we move to the next slide, to Aubrey Murifi from the Co-ops unit. Thank you, Aubrey.
Thank you very much, Elma. Welcome, everyone. My name is Aubrey Murifi. I'm team manager in the cooperative division, and I'll be taking you through the presentation. As Elma has stated during the introduction, the purpose and format of this presentation is to talk about the amended Cooperative Act 6 of 2013, which has been amended. The Act should be read in conjunction with the new regulation as well as the principles of good governance. And basically with the presentation will focus on the changes in terms of the Act, the forms and fees in terms of the regulations, registrations of cooperatives, payment of annual fees, IXBRL, and future automated service. We can move to the next slide. The next slide, as you can see, it was just basically about the heading. The aim of the Amendment Act is to provide a distinction between the different categories of primary cooperative in order to make compliance less costly for small cooperative. It also, draws different requirements for accounting review, audits, annual submission for different categories of cooperatives. It promotes sustainability of cooperatives. It also makes provision for the national apex. On Chapter 1 of the Amended Act, it also states about the different definitions, and also on the definitions, the registrar, as was on the 2005 Act, the Register of Cooperative, it's now replaced by the Commissioner of CIPC. Moving on to the next slide. On the Amended Act, it also makes provision for associate members. Associate members may be given, taken as temporary members that support the cooperative. Such membership is only valid for a period of 12 months, but can be renewed or converted into a full membership thereafter. Associate members can be appointed as non-executive, but do not have voting rights in any of the meetings. And moving on to the next slide. The Amended Act make provision for different categories of primary cooperatives, namely Category A, Category B, Category C. All secondary and tertiary cooperatives and national apex are Category C, but have their own annual fees structure. The categories are used to determine the members' voting rights, documents that must be submitted to CIPC annually, annual fees, of which the amounts are clearly specified in the regulations. In terms of the voting rights, Category A and Category B, primary cooperatives, they have a one member, one vote. And with Category C, primary, all secondary, tertiary cooperative and national apex, in terms of Section 3, subsection 3 and 4, the Constitution may provide, the cooperative may provide in its Constitution that some members have additional voting if the co-op has 3 or more members. Moving on to the next slide. The next slide, it's basically in terms of Schedule 1 of the regulation is prescribed. The registration fee to register a cooperative have been reduced from 215 to 175 with name reservation, compulsory name reservation. And then this name reservation, it can be done on the website, and you'll see that as we go along during the presentation. And the registration fee for a cooperative, it's now 125. It also makes provision for divisions of cooperatives, 425, conversions, and transfers. And moving on to the next slide. On the next slide, you have to note that our forms have changed. With the 2005 Act, our forms were known as CR. They started with CR. Like you'd have your CR1 to register, your CR2 relating to director changes, but with the new legislation, these forms have now been changed to co-op, meaning for a CR1, it has now changed to co-op 1. And all these forms are also available on the CIPC website under Access. Moving on to the next slide. The Amendment Act also makes provision for a cooperative which can be formed by a minimum of 5 natural persons, 2 juristic persons, a combination of any 5. A secondary cooperative can be formed by 2 or more operational primary cooperatives. A tertiary cooperative, on the other hand, can be formed by 2 or more operational secondary cooperative, and the national apex 3 operational sectoral co-ops that operate nationally, and 5 operational multi-sectoral tertiary cooperative that operate on a provincial and district or local level. And the emphasis on the new legislation act, it's on the issue of operational. And operational, in terms of the legislation, it actually means that the co-op must have held its annual general meeting and have submitted its annual report, audited report, or independent review to CIPC in the last financial year. As we move on to the next slide, co-op application fee payments. Application payment system on the application payment method depends on the system utilized for the transaction. With the manual applications that are still applicable to your primary cooperative and tertiary cooperative, you still use your customer codes that we've been using all along. And then with the new e-services that has been introduced to cater for registration of primary cooperatives, uses bank cards. It could either be a debit or credit bank card. Moving on to the next slide. Primary cooperative registration, you would also note that from the 1st of April, primary cooperative manual registration was phased out, and it was replaced by the new e-services. When you go onto the CIPC website, you click on online transacting. Then from the online transacting, you click on new e-services. Then that system is available 24 hours. You can then be able to register your primary cooperative on the system. Moving on to the next slide. With regard to secondary and tertiary cooperative, as we've stated on the previous slide, there are still manual submission where you still have to complete your Co-op 1 form, which was previously known as the CR1, as I've also indicated. And once that has been completed, you also note that you also need to submit your COR 9.4, which is your confirmation of name reservation, and as well as your certified copies of IDs. And the certification should not be older than 3 months. Moving on to the next slide. On the new e-services, customers must complete for the registration for a primary cooperative. Also, you also need to note that the new e-services under this system is a start to end, meaning you start with your name reservation, your actual registration of the co-op, can be done on this platform. The step-by-step guides are also available on the CIPC website for customers that maybe might not be aware how to go about doing it. And when using the new e-services, if you have a customer code, you log in with your email address. But if you do not have a customer code, then you need to create a username. But this time, a username will then be your email address. Moving on to the next slide. The online primary registration, the payment, as we have also stated, it's done by bank card, which could be a debit or a credit card. Members' IDs are also verified on the system. Our system is also linked with Department of Home Affairs. For South Africans, system is able to verify them, and there's no need to upload ID copies for South Africans. But in terms of foreigners, ID copies should be uploaded. And you also just need to ensure that the certification is not older than 3 months. And one other thing that you also need to keep in mind, which is also stated as a provision, it's the issue of record keeping, that once you have registered, you also need to keep the constitution safe into the co-op records for reference, for future references. Moving on to the next slide. On this slide, it's just steps that show once you go on the new e-services, you start with name reservation. Once you've done name reservation, you need to pay 50 rands. Once the name has been approved, then you capture your co-op details and check the correctness. Upload certified passport in case you've got foreign nationals. And then once you've submitted, you'll then receive your co-op one and your constitution, which needs to be signed. And you then sign the last page of the constitution, as well as your co-op, which you then upload. And then once it's uploaded, the CIPC back office will check for compliance and will then give a preliminary approval. And then once you get the preliminary approval, you will get a notice to make payment of 125. But there are cases wherein you'd find when the application comes through to the back office, and maybe there's things that also need to be corrected. In such cases, your application is then rejected, but you'll then get notification via email indicating clearly what you need to complete to make your application compliant. And you also need to remember that once an application has been rejected, you do not have to restart the process from scratch. You just log in, correct whatever that needs to be corrected, then upload. And then once the application is approved, then you'll get notification, as I've also indicated, to make payment using your debit card or credit card. And then you would then receive your registration documents, your registration certificates via email. And moving on to the next slide. It's also important to note when you do propose name, or when you do name reservation, name the same or similar to an existing co-op may be misleading or undesirable. And the co-op registered before the Cooperative Amendment Act of 2013, the name should always contain the word cooperative, and at the end, it must also indicate limited or LTD. The name of the co-op registered after commencement of the amended act must end with Co-op Limited. And also important to know that only the national apex it's allowed to use the word apex as part of their name. So if you're registering a primary, a secondary, or tertiary, you don't have to use the word apex on as part of your name. And moving on to the next slide. The next slides that will be coming through will relate to annual fees and annual submissions. In terms of section 26A, also included in the regulations, annual fees that must be payable to CIPC may differ by category of co-op. These fees will be implemented at a later stage. As you might be aware, relating to annual returns which are applicable to companies and close corporations, at a later stage, these annual fees and annual returns would also be implemented for cooperatives. But once that stage arrives, notification will also be published on the website, notifying customers when that period has come around. And you also need to take into account annual returns, also take into cognizance the annual revenue, which means the gross value of the economic benefits received by the co-op as a results of its ordinary activity during a financial year. Moving on to the next slide. On this slide, it's basically about the different categories as we've indicated. The new legislation makes provision for different categories of co-op. You would have your very small co-ops, which is your category A, whose annual turnover threshold it's less than 1 million. The lodgement for annual returns would be 50 rands, which is 30 days of the due date. But once it's lodged more than 30 days after the due date, then the fee applicable would be 100 rands. Then you would have your category A2 primary, whose turnover threshold is 1 million but less than 10 million. The lodgement would also still be the same as A1 category, which is 50 rands, lodged 30 days before due date. And if it's after 30 days, it's 100 rands. Then you would have your category B primary, whose turnover is 10 million but less than 25 million. In this case, lodged within 30 days or due date, it's 450. Lodged more than 30 days after the due date, it's 600 rands. And moving on to the next category and the next slides. On these slides, you would have your category C cooperatives. Then these are, your bigger primary cooperatives whose turnover threshold is 25 million. Lodgement in this case would be 3,000. Lodged 30 days of due date. And if it's lodged after the 30 days, it's 4,000 rands. Moving on to the next slide. On this slide, you then have your bigger cooperative, in this case, your secondary, tertiary, or national apex, whose revenue 25 million. And if it's lodged within 30 days of the due date, it's 450 rands. Lodged more than 30 days, it's 600 rands. And we can move on to the next slide. As we've also indicated, the legislation also makes provision for the record keeping, that there's records that the co-op needs to keep in their own, for their own records and for future purposes. As I've also indicated, also once you've registered, you also need to keep things like your constitutions and rules and amendments thereto, the minutes of the general and the directors' meetings. If the co-op has got a supervisory committee, keep minutes thereof, the list of members, the list of directors, the register of directors and employees, interests, contracts that the co-op has undertaken, the accounting records, financial statements. The Act makes provision that the financial record can be kept for a period of 5 years or a longer period as determined by the minister. And it's also important to note that a co-op or a director who fails to comply with record keeping requirements may be guilty of an offense. Moving on to the next slide. The next slides, it just shows the different documentation. These documents are also available on the website. The category A, the forms that have to be submitted are your COP 7, COP 8, and then for financials, it's your COP 15.1, your annual report, and it also indicates, as stated on the slide, that this information can also be completed by your directors. But when you move to your category B, the documents or forms that have to be completed for submission to CIPC are your COP 4, COP 7, and COP 8, independently reviewed financial statements, independent review report, and this can be completed by your independent reviewer. Also indicating on your category C, which is then moving on to your bigger cooperatives, which then, in terms of financials, are required to submit annual audited financial statements or audited report, and this information is completed by the auditor. And moving on to the next slide. The Act, as we've also indicated clearly on Chapter 1 of the Act, there's clear definitions. If you'd like to know the new definitions, the new definitions are there on Chapter 1. They clearly states what an annual report are, what management decision reports are, independent review reports are. So I would not go read every word on the presentations. You can move on to the next slide. Cooperatives, some cooperatives will in the near future be required to submit annual financial statements via IXBRL on the CIPC website. We anticipate to launch a pilot project by the 1st of April 2022, which would then give us an opportunity to monitor how the system works and also to check if there's any challenges that are being experienced during the filing. Filing would be voluntary for willing cooperatives, and implementation, once we've monitored system challenges, mandatory filing will then follow, but that communication will be published on the website, notifying clearly when cooperatives will be required to submit annual financial statements via XBRL. We can move on to the next slide. XBRL, to which cooperative will submit annual financial statements, only cooperatives that are required to be audited, like your category C primary cooperatives, secondary, tertiary, national, will have to submit annual financial statements to CIPC in electronic format via IXBRL. IXBRL usage will be available for independent review annual financial statements, category B, primary cooperative. However, it shall not be mandatory. And it's also important that there's a lot of information on the website relating to IXBRL. CIPC, as we move on to the next slide, CIPC embraces international financial best practice and the impact of the use of IXBRL when submitting financial statements online. It's also important to know that IXBRL, it's an inline extensive business reporting language for electronic communication for business information, which was developed to improve the communication of financial data online and is used in a number of countries. IXBRL simplifies how people use or share, analyze financial data. It's a computer language that will be required to transfer audited financial statements of category C cooperatives to CIPC. XBRL allows XBRL document to be presented in a format that is readable by both computers and humans. And this digital reporting in IXBRL format also assists business to file annual financial statements while moving from paper or PDF reporting to a more structured format. For more information, as we've also indicated on the website, there's a lot of FAQs relating to IXBRL, and there's the email address xbrl@cipc.co.za. And this system, it's already in use and being implemented by like your companies and close corporations. As we move on to the next slide, all cooperative queries can be lodged on the CIPC website. And from the CIPC website, you click on Query Resolution System, QRS. From this system, you can be able to select the division, if it's companies or if it's co-op, then queries can then be promptly responded to. There's also email addresses. If you'd like to submit your director changes, the process are still manual currently. The email addresses As they are on the slide, it's Co-op2 at CIPC.co.za, and all Co-op6 relating to your special resolution, such as the amendment of the Constitution, are on the email address. It's Co-op6 at CIPC.co.za, and relating to Co-op3, which was previously known as the CR3, like in case the co-op wants to change the addresses or would like to appoint an auditor or an independent reviewer with a Co-op4, the relevant email address there, it's the Co-op3 and 4 at CIPC.co.za, and the online application, the applications for manual registration for your secondary and tertiary cooperatives, the email in use is the email that has been used all along. It's your cooperatives online at cipc.co.za. Moving on to the next slide. More types of cooperatives will be made available on the new e-services. Remember, this would be in a phased approach. We've already started with the primary cooperatives. The next phase will then be your secondary, your tertiary cooperatives, but prior notice will be sent out to customers on the CIPC website, as well as on our social media platform when that period has arrived. Moving on to the next slide. It's also important to remember on a regular basis to regularly visit the CIPC website to view our notices and all the developments and requirements. You're also more than welcome to visit our social media platform, like your Facebook. CIPC is also active on those platforms. You can at any time visit those to check new updates and new notifications that are being posted on a regular basis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aubrey. We will move on to our question and answer session. May I just say that the slides, I noticed there was a question about the slides. We will make it available on our website under webinars within 5 days, as well as the recording of this webinar. However, if you want to, as far as the slides are concerned, you can also send email to education@cipc.co.za, then we will also forward it to you. But if we can start then with the first question, it says, can you make a cooperation to be online services as well than doing the manual registration? At the moment, primary co-op registration, I think, as Aubrey said, is online, and we will in future, somewhere in the near future, I think also have secondary and tertiary, if I'm not wrong. So yes, we are definitely moving in that direction. Thank you. Next question, please. It says, I did everything to register the co-op, but it now allows me to pay 120 Rand left. It asks me for forms. Aubrey?
When you register for a primary cooperative on the new e-services, once you have submitted, you should then be able to get a co-op 1 to your email. If it's not coming through on your email from the new e-services, you can click on the link that indicates waiting for approval to CIPC, then your co-op 1 are are also preloaded on that platform. You can then be able to download those, the COP 1 and the Constitution. Once it's signed and submitted, the system will, and as I've also indicated on the slide, it then goes to back office for pre-approval. And then once it's approved, then you will get a notification via email to pay the remaining 125 rands. And then once that 125 rand has been paid, is then that you get your registered documents. But I see the client indicates 120. I'm not sure with the 120, but the required fee is 125. And once you've paid the 125, then you will then get your registration documents. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Aubrey. Next question. Where do I find constitutional, or I suppose it's the Constitution?
The constitutions are, the generic constitutions are available on the CIPC website. If you go on www.cipc, and then once you are on the home page, you click under Access. And then from Access, you click on Forms. And then there's a list of our different forms, as we have also indicated during the presentation. And then just below the forms, all the constitutions are also uploaded there. All the different constitutions, they are also loaded there. Thank you.
May I just add, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Aubrey, but with primary co-ops, it's not necessary to go and find the forms and the Constitution. In other words, as we said on the website, since you're using new e-services, and the system will create the form as well as the Constitution on the system, which you download, you print it, you sign it, and you upload it again. But if it's a secondary or tertiary co-op, that's when you go to the website. You can also find it under Register Your Business, and you go to co-ops, and I know it's there as well. So they've got two options how they can find it. Thank you. The next question, please. Okay, how to file annual returns for cooperative? What is the process at the moment? And Mabusi, I think that one is for you.
Okay. Thank you, Elma. Good morning to everybody. To answer the question on filing of annual returns, it was stated clearly in the presentation that cooperatives are at the moment not required to pay annual returns because we are busy with the development of the annual returns program. However, cooperatives are required to submit their annual financial reports depending on the category and their revenues, and then they can forward those financial statements to cooperatives online at cipc.co.za. Thank you.
Thank you, Mabusi. Next question. Okay, this one. Can CIPC add CSD? Please, I'm struggling to get it. Okay, this I don't think is a co-op question. So I think we'll skip that one. How long does it take to register co-op on the e-service? We have registered 2 months ago, and status still reflects currently under review.
The turnaround time, it's about two days. So what I'm not sure why it's still under review. But once you've uploaded all the documents, as we have indicated during the presentation, like your co-op one, signed the co-op one, and your signed last page of the Constitution. Once you have uploaded that information and it's submitted, back office should be able to receive it immediately when you submit. The back office should be able to receive it, to review, and then the co-op can either be rejected, which would then, you would then get a notification as to what are the reasons for the rejection. And then if it's pre-approved, then you would also get a notification that the co-op is pre-approved, and you need to pay the required 125 to finalize your registration. But if you're still experiencing any further challenges, what I suggest you also do, you can just log a query on the CIPC website on QRS, and then you select cooperative registration, and then you clearly specify like the name of the co-op, clearly specify what your challenges are, and we will promptly respond to your query. Thank you.
Next question, please. May I just mention, I noted on the comments that there was somebody who asked, it wasn't a co-op question, I think, as such, but they did ask whether they can send subjects for webinars, and they're welcome to do so at education at cipc.co.za. It's an email address. Please send subjects you want us to have webinars about. You're very welcome. As far as delinquent directors, I think there is already a recording of one on companies on our website. The next question says, members to have emails, is it compulsory?
Thank you very much for the question. It's compulsory for each member to have emails. And I think emails would also be very, very important moving on now to the subject that we've also spoke about during the presentation, especially around the issue of annual returns. So emails will be really, really very important, because each time the co-op has to, file, when the period has arrived for them to file their annual submission or annual returns, then reminders will then be sent through to the different members. So emails are mandatory on the system, so you would not be able to proceed without email addresses. If you don't have email addresses, then you need to create those email addresses for the different members. Thank you.
Next question, please. This is an awesome initiative. Oh, this is the one I answered already about subjects that you're welcome to send us any ideas on any subject you would want us to have a webinar on. You can send email to education@cipc.co.za, and we will see if we can do so. Thank you for that one. Next question. When a cooperative has not been operational, is there anything that they should submit to show that they still exist? Mabusi, that one is for you.
Thank you, Elma. To answer the question on existence and operational cooperatives, yes, as the Act requires, cooperatives are required to submit annually Form Co-op 7 and then Form Co-op 8, and then they must also update their director details on Form Cooperative 2. It is required by the Act, and it must be done on an annual basis. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, please. How do you make changes to the name of a cooperative? Is there was an error during registration process? It's also Mabusi, hey? Mabusi, please help us.
Okay. Thank you once again, Elma. To make This one, it will depend. Remember, if you reserve a name for a cooperative, when you capture it when on initial registration, you capture it as it was approved by name reservation and as it exists on our database. So, and because I don't know where the error arose, was it a typing error or maybe was it reserved that way? But it would be best for the client to complete, to go through the name reservation process again by going to new e-services and applying to reserve the correct name. Then afterwards, that's where they will pay the 50 Rand for name reservation for the correct name. And then afterwards, they must complete form Co-op 6.1 and indicate on the form that they're changing the name or correcting the name from the erroneous name to the new correct name, and then we will process the application for them. A fee of 35 Rand is payable for Co-op Form 6.1 for name change. And then the approved name plus the Co-op 6.1 form must be emailed to coop6@cipc.co.za. Thank you.
Thank you, Mabusi. Okay, and the next question, please. Okay, it says I registered the PTY. Okay, this one is not a co-op question, so I'm not going to take it now. If we can please have a next question. May I just, before I continue, say, if your question is not about co-ops, we will not be taking it today. However, you are welcome to either submit an inquiry on our website, or otherwise, you can also send a query by messenger on our Facebook page. Please do so. Don't put it under comments on Facebook. Put it, use the messenger service, and somebody from our staff will respond. Okay, then the next question is, we have exhausted all the questions relevant. Oh, sorry, it's not a question. I'm being informed here that we have exhausted all the questions relevant to this webinar. So it actually means we've come to the end of the webinar. If I may just repeat what I just said. If you have a question, which is, well, it can be about co-ops as well that you think about later, or you might have typed a question but wasn't about co-ops, then please go to our website. On the homepage, there's like a little button that says inquiries. Click there and submit your inquiry there. Or otherwise, on Messenger on Facebook, please send a query there and you will also get a response. I want to thank everybody that joined us today for the webinar. I hope we will also see you again in future webinars. And to find out about our webinars, to be notified, if you're not already on Facebook, please join Facebook, our CIPC Facebook, because you will also be notified on Facebook of every webinar. We also have a webinar tomorrow about company public offerings. It's for public companies. So anybody is welcome to join us at 11 tomorrow for that as well. Thank you very much and have a good day. Goodbye.